Welcome to the Final podcast, where we go behind the scenes of the game industry through conversations with the artists and developers who bring it to life. I'm your host, Michael Pasker. I'm an artist, lifelong gamer, and industry veteran. And today I'm joined by Greg Cox, a talented environment artist who's helped craft some incredible worlds, including Halo Infinite and more recently, DEADROP. Greg, welcome to the show. Hey, man.
Michael, hey, thanks for inviting me on, man.
Anytime, buddy. So, let's let's just start off, huh?
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Greg.
yeah. Well, I'm from a small town in Southern California called Riverside. Um, when I was young, I did a lot of drawing and played a lot of video games like your average kid did. Um, Played a lot of Super Mario Brothers, and our household was a Sega Genesis household, so we played a lot of the Sonic games and
Nice.
classics like Shining Force, RPGs, and stuff like that. So from a very early age, I was playing games nonstop and just getting captivated by the worlds that game developers were making. So it's a big part of my life and big part of my childhood.
Nice.
Um, but
Um,
yeah,
is that where you kind of got the bug to want to make games, or
it
what? Or
wasn't until I was
were you a
like
creative kid like this? Like, were you drawing? Like, this is a creative job, and I don't know. I feel like
Yeah, a
this
little
kind
bit, a little bit. I mean, I did a lot of drawing as a kid. My parents got me like a sketch pad when I was very young, and the reason they did that was because my older brother,
of.
I'm the youngest of three, he was a sketcher too. He did a lot of sketching, and so I naturally was interested and wanted to kind of do what he was doing. So my parents were pretty good about kind of fostering that creativity. They also were adamant about getting us out in sports and playing t-ball and baseball and things like that. So it wasn't like a complete just like artistic kind of upbringing or
Yeah.
anything. But I didn't know that I wanted to work in games until I was about maybe 14, 13 or 14 or something like that. There
It's not a
was
job that you, if, from what I experience, it's not something that you plan on doing.
yeah, oh god, no. Yeah.
I kind of fell into it myself, but
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. That's very, very true, man. Yeah, for me, it was my father got us a computer when I was around like 10 years old or something like that. It was a
Mm,
Windows 95, very early on kind of computer and everything. And then that's when I got hooked. That's when it
that's
was
cool.
like companies like Bungie were putting out some awesome stuff, and then Blizzard, of course, with Warcraft and
Yeah.
StarCraft. But there was one game in particular. It was a um, point and click adventure game by Westwood Studios called Blade Runner. It was a Blade Runner
Oh,
game, and
it was
it
super
wasn't,
cinematic. I think it had like actual, like real talent doing voice acting and things like that.
yeah, it was a pretty good. It seemed like they had a really good idea of what they wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
and their whole angle seemed to be making it very cinematic and immersive.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is what gave me the bug about like, maybe when I grow up, I can. It would be cool to get into that for a
Mm-hmm.
job. But that game was so successful with just its audio, its pre-rendered backgrounds, and the story was also just really solid too. I mean, you're a detective in Blade Runner,
Yeah.
everybody wants that, right? For kind of some kind of experience, right? For a video game. And it was very, very successful. So I got pulled in pretty hard with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that would
I
probably be something I'd want to do in the future.
I was more in the Space Quest vein
Oh
of
yeah.
games.
Yeah, dude, Space Quest was great.
And Larry, Leisure Suit Larry.
Oh yeah.
those
Yeah,
were
the classics.
those were the point and click adventure games back then. They still have
Yeah.
them now. They can find them now. Netflix has a game, Oxenfree, I think it's called.
Oh,
It's
cool.
point and click. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, sometimes I'd like to go back to GOG.com and pick up some of the classic games there
Mm,
too and everything because now you can't run them. You have to have
yeah,
an old PC to run some of these things.
yeah. That it's
But
kind of, yeah. It leads me to like talk, since we're talking about games. I feel like that's something that's important to have in your pocket when you're applying for a, when you want to work in the game industry, right? It's like you have
oh
to have
yeah,
that language. You have, we were talking about that earlier, where you can have people that want to do games but they don't play games. So it's kind of the language people have and the relationships people have are because of games in the industry. You know,
oh yeah,
we relate to
absolutely.
each other in a certain way.
Yeah, it's also how you find like-minded individuals who they get it, right? Quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, they get it. Where it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like when you're going for a very particular experience, a vibe, or in terms of art, the feel, of everything. Landing on that aesthetic that is a shared thing amongst others. And yeah, so I totally agree with you. But that era, that mid '90s
Mm-hmm.
to early 2000s was like, gaming was blowing up bigger than ever, like it's always been, MMOs from World of Warcraft,
Mm-hmm.
they had Star Wars Galaxies, there was Ultima Online was the original, of course, and so I was starting to get pulled in pretty hard to gaming in those years. Um, but shortly after 9/11 kind of went down and
Mm.
everything, like I decided I was about 17 years old when that happened. So I was,
Wait, you're
um,
younger than
you know,
me? Oh man.
yeah.
Reminding me my age again.
Yeah, I was born in '85. I'm an '85 baby. It's
Nice.
pretty decent year as far as the '80s go.
85. Oh wow. I was still in Israel at
Yeah.
that time.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Go on. Sorry, I
but
keep
yeah, so
derailing it.
no, you're good. You're good. But yeah, like so 9/11 went down and in
Yeah.
my family, previous generations of my family have served in the military and stuff like that. So military service was kind of something that was very, honored
Mm-hmm.
and cherished in our family. And for my generation, nobody had gone to
Mm.
serve yet. And so I was very adamant about doing that. I was in JROTC in high school, and I was kind of preparing for that, kind of getting ready to kind of go into that because,
Mm.
for me, I like it really helped me because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like working on video games wasn't even really like it was cool. It was like the idea of it was like, oh, yeah, that'd be cool or something like that. But it wasn't something I was gravitated towards. I wasn't exactly sure
Yeah.
what I wanted to do yet. So the army provided me a few years to kind of figure that out, and kind of be like, what
Mm.
do you want to do, But I also had a couple years where I could serve the country for my family and just say like, okay, our family, hey, we stepped up when we were asked to, um, so that was a very
Did
big
you
part of my
have
life.
I'm from what I hear, when there's a lot of downtime, they play a lot of games
Oh yeah,
in the
oh
army.
yeah,
So
man.
you're staying kind of relevant with the games.
Yeah, man, Halo was just blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
Halo 2, I think, was out when I was deployed. So when
Mm-hmm.
we were coming back stateside, a lot of the decompression was like going to the gym and like a rec room where you could play like Halo. So
Mm-hmm.
we would play that into the ground, of course, being kind of bored out there. But but yeah, and then when I kind of came back to the states, I was stationed in Fort Riley, Kansas, for a period of time
Mm-hmm.
as I finished out my contract. But it was around this time,
The
where
contract of
oh
killing.
yeah, just
Just kidding.
you're kind of your service, right? You sign up for 4 years,
Oh,
seven
okay.
years, or there's different
Did you ever feel
time
like you
frames.
could have it as a career at that time?
Well, I signed up for the infantry, so um, for me, I like seeing what I had seen and just kind of experiencing that, like
Mm.
it wasn't necessarily for
Mm.
me. I'm 5'10". I'm a kind of a short guy, and your knees
Mm.
just get tore up pretty badly. So most of the time when you're over doing whatever job it is that you're doing, you might end up in a situation where you got to be squatting down quite a bit because
Mm.
you got to keep your head down, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, or you're just
It's tough.
you know carrying a lot of equipment and stuff. So um, but yeah, for me, I was just kind of like, hey, you know what? I did a tour over there, and there are some support missions that we did that I'm very proud of, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's other things that are very educational to help you grow up a little bit faster. And so, I'd had enough, I think, and I said that, I think this is a not necessarily the life for me for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I better men and women can go on to do that while I step away. And so it was at that time around 2007, I
Mm-hmm.
was getting out of the military, and then that's when the Art Institute was big, right? That's when there
In
was a
San
lot of
Francisco?
campuses. No, so they were coming down into the Inland Empire. So
Okay.
there was a San Diego branch, and
Oh.
then the school that was closest to me when I got home was an Inland Empire kind of branch that was out in San Bernardino,
Okay.
California. Um, but those campuses were kind of popping up quite a bit across
So
the
what
country.
did you go into the school with? Like
Yeah,
as far as
yeah.
a focus or
Mm.
whatever?
Yeah, I think early on it was kind of, there was a desire to be like, you know what, I want to kind of step into this world a little bit and see what it's about. I didn't know if I
Did
necessarily
they
wanted to jump into
basically go
games
over
or
generally all the types of things, or were there like tracks that were specific to certain aspects of that of gaming?
yeah, yeah. So, you have like of course they have recruiters and stuff like that that kind of come out and
Mm-hmm.
look for kids who are willing to throw away a ton of money
Right.
and and everything and take your money. But yeah, the courses were kind of just like, hey, there's multimedia design, there's
Mm.
graphic arts, of course,
Okay.
and then of course there was one called game art, right? So there was a
Okay.
game art kind of like path. It'd be like, hey, this is a course that can kind of help you get into video games if you're interested and kind of learn the ropes
Mm-hmm.
about what that kind of job would look like. But that particular branch that I went to for that school, it had a really good makeup of instructors, and
Mm-hmm.
not just for the game art stuff, but for just traditional art, traditional
Mm.
painting, and all the great anatomy classes, perspective drawing, design one-on-one
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one classes that are obviously super super important.
Yeah.
Um,
As a
but
foundation, I think people should do all that stuff. Get into
yeah,
all the foundational things, and then everything kind of falls in line later. Everything sort of follows the same rules,
yeah, oh, it's
you
it's
know.
paramount. It's extremely important to get people through those foundations and have a clear understanding of, like, those traditional skills.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may not use it unless if that's your job, like unless you're like painting, and that you're doing portrait painting and stuff like that. You may not use a lot of those traditional
Mm-hmm.
skills when you're in an industry like ours, right? But it's still extremely important to kind of
Yeah.
refer back to. And there's things from design classes like, rule of thirds, compositional studies, things like that, that will still be a good aid to any artist who's
Mm-hmm.
trying to get into the field. Um,
Were there any
uh,
artists that you guys were, I don't know, looking up to or referencing, or because I know back then the whole online portfolio thing had just been starting, and some artists had started putting things out. Like for me, the only reason knew about Noman was I went to Feng Zhu's website, and
oh yeah,
he
things.
worked for them. And it was always like, oh, what is this like fancy school, like this crazy Noman school, and doing the research, I was able to go into it. And, back then, that's kind of like the only resource is like these. Not everybody knew about these kinds of things. So you have to like
Yeah.
follow an artist, or, find it in the back of a magazine.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, the Noman workshop, of course, was like it was the GOAT. It was the
Mm-hmm.
go-to, especially for, you're doing vehicle design with Scott Robertson. You're doing like the storytelling illustrations with Ian McKegg,
Mm-hmm.
and just all of the greats that kind of set down the foundation for
Yeah.
starting people in the industry, like it was cool. Um, but yeah, we even had Ian McKegg came out to our campus
Oh,
and
sweet.
spoke uh, to us all, and with all of his cool, awesome stories, and
Mm-hmm.
getting people,
He's
kind of
a
pumped up.
very like energetic guy when he talks about his stuff.
Yeah,
It's pretty cool.
yeah. Well, that's, I mean, it shows in his tutorial series and stuff, and I still have those things. I go back to him, if I'm ever
Nice.
feeling nostalgic about the old days and
I
everything.
have mine,
You
but I don't know how I can run them because they're supposed to be on a PC
Yeah,
DVD, and not these PCs stopped having disk drives a long time ago.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think
Absolutely, man.
everything went to their like subscription online thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it was worth the money. That I mean, like it was kind of expensive, but it was worth it. Depending on what you were going after, like
Mm-hmm.
the Scott Robertson vehicle design stuff was really just beneficial because I was getting into Max,
Mm.
3ds Max, and some of my early, intro to 3D modeling
Scott.
courses, and so we were looking at a lot of Gnomon Workshop
Mm-hmm.
to kind of like guide us through kind of like, hey, if you're going to do some vehicle designs, it's really important that you look at these and you
Mm-hmm.
start to kind of get an understanding and um, get an idea of why vehicles are designed the way that they are. So I did 3 years while
So
I
is that how
maintained a
you got
job.
into
Yeah.
more of the hard surface stuff and less into
Yeah.
like character?
Yeah, what's
Mm-hmm.
cool about the Art Institute, like with that program, it was a good program for anybody who was really like dedicated. You could really get a lot out of it, and if you had good instructors,
Mm-hmm.
it was great. But yeah, we would kind of go through these intro classes, right? 3D modeling, intro to 3D, character art, intro to vehicle
Mm-hmm.
art, and so some of those were kind of bunched up into, they would change the name of the course or something like that to be like, oh, hard surface modeling,
Yeah.
right? But that might include your vehicles, it might include weapons,
Yeah.
depending on the instructor, it might be specifically around vehicles, it might be that you might have the choice to do weapons and stuff like that. So there was a kind of a lot of variables that kind of played into what exactly you were going
Mm.
to be tackling. But if you knew what you wanted to do, it was a plus because the instructors were always pretty good about wanting to work with you
Mm-hmm.
around those things or give you a kind of a heads up of like, hey, just so you know, if you're going to get into this is the kind of focus it's going to require.
Yeah.
um but yeah, and I didn't really have like there wasn't anything I was like immediately drawn to. I grew up on Star Wars like most kids, in terms of films that might have impacted you when you were young. Star
Mm-hmm.
Wars, of course, was a big one, right? A lot of people would get into entertainment industry because of that. And so for me, it's like, oh, hey, I want to model a lightsaber, that'd
Mm-hmm.
be a cool first project,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I wasn't really kind of aiming for any one thing. I wasn't like, oh, I
Yeah.
want to do vehicles only, or I want to do characters only. I just kind of was taking it
Whatever.
in
Yeah. Came
and
to.
and absorbing it,
Mm-hmm.
So
You were basically learning the skill a lot
yeah,
more than
learning the
the.
ropes.
Yeah.
And the other thing too
And
was
that's
just that,
fine if you, whatever gets you from A to B, to Z, whatever. A model just to practice, model whatever you want. I remember my first Maya model was like a billion polys. I think it was polys at that point, or normals, or not normals, NURBs. It was NURBs,
oh right,
and it was
nerves,
all. It was.
right?
I built this giant. What do they call those gambling boats in Louisiana? I forget those big wheel kind of boats, and I can't even open it these days. It's so big.
Oh my gosh,
But
yeah,
the idea, and it was in my portfolio forever. Like I had it like all rotational and stuff. But um, yeah, looking at it now, it's just for practice. It's like how you
oh
get to where
yeah.
you are today.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I'll go back and look at just how many unfinished projects,
Mm,
there are from like that time when I was in school, and just kind of like, oh, I want to try this out, and then you start to hit your limitation on what you know, and you get stuck and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I know what you mean though. There's a
Yeah.
couple of those old projects that were just really, really heavy and not being able to kind of revisit them, or if
Yeah.
you were to do it again, you would start over anyway, just because it's too much of a hassle. So
So, after school, how, like, what did you go straight into a game company, and how, like, what happened there?
yeah, so I was very fortunate. There was a couple of individuals who were ahead of me
Mm.
in the program, and it was a very small school, so there wasn't a whole lot of graduates
Mm.
into game art at the time. But I was lucky that I had a couple of good friends named Aaron Contreras
Mm-hmm.
and Danny Carloni. I went to school with both these guys, and these are just both awesome environment artists who were kind of just really dialed in, and as you would imagine, they got jobs early,
Mm-hmm.
before they even graduated.
Wow.
Um, but these guys were getting hit up by recruiters, and they were being kind of headhunted and everything. And I was getting towards the end of
How
my
exactly was that
path.
happening? Like, how did people know about them at that time? Like, was there websites they
Yeah,
posted to? Like, how did
yeah, I
that?
think they probably, I can't say for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but I would imagine that they were just very active about applying for jobs,
Mm.
and reaching out to and networking with others and stuff like that. But it also was, around 2008, 2009. That's when headhunters and
Mm.
and recruiters, I'll just say recruiters because that's what they are now, right? But they were starting to get more active in
Okay.
those
So
times
they
because
were
there was a
checking
whole
out
wave.
schools and
Yeah,
everything for talent.
yeah, there was a
Okay.
whole wave of people kind of graduating from these
Mm-hmm.
programs across AI in California, and of course the country. But
Mm-hmm.
speaking for California, like you can kind of see the cottage industry that was starting to build for recruiters kind of seeking talent
Mm-hmm.
in our industry. And um, they got picked up. They got the good
That's great.
portfolios. They had websites, and so um, it's really important. Like the networking is just, it's kind of a really big factor in the kind of industry that we serve
Mm-hmm.
in. Uh, so anyway, recruiter was kind of hitting up one of my friends, Aaron, and he was like, "Listen, I have a job, but you might want to take a look at this guy."
Mm.
And
Nice.
that's where it began for me. So I was wrapping up my program at the Art Institute, um, and then I started getting hit up for by a recruiter for potentially looking at a contract up in Washington to
Mm-hmm.
work on the upcoming Halo
Oh,
project that they were kind
wow.
of
Right out of
hitting.
school.
Yeah,
Lucky guy.
yeah, I got lucky with it, man. I got
That's
lucky with it. I
awesome.
took I took the art test the first time and didn't pass. So there's this infamous old school Bungie art test. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a sci-fi looking hallway, and you know, um, it's something that they've used to kind of art test hard surface artists and environment artists for
Mm-hmm.
years and years. Um, but that was the test that was given to me, and I went ahead and did it. And first time it was just kind of like, hey, this is cool, man, but I think we're gonna go separate ways here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, all right, well, listen, it sucks, but it's a good experience. But there was only a couple of days that kind of went by, and then they came back to me and they're like, hey, listen, we want to give this to you again, but here's a different concept art. Here's a different piece. Here's the limitations. I think it was like 1:5:12 map, as far as
Wow.
texture sizes go. Very, very limited in what you could use for the scene. And I had 24 hours. They gave me 24 hours to kind of go in and do the best I could. And I used every single minute of that 24 hours.
That's awesome.
Um, but it was a really, really good exercise for me. And it was also a really good preview too, because our industry is
Mm-hmm.
very tough. It's very tough, and it requires a great deal of your time and focus. So anyhow, I went ahead and
So,
sent off the
yeah,
results, and I got a call back in a couple of
that's great.
days. So
10 years later, Halo 5. Just so how was that experience going from like a school to now you're in an office and there's just gamers and weirdos everywhere.
Yeah, well, that was actually pretty much it. Yeah, no, it was wonderful. It was
Hmm.
exhilarating. I didn't even I couldn't go back for my graduation because
Wow.
I had to move. I had to
Yeah.
move out of the state. I had to move up to Washington and kind of get situated. But it was exciting,
Hmm.
and by the time I got up there, I'm in this new landscape, and Washington State's beautiful. You know, I got a beautiful Pacific Northwest, so it's just like, oh, how great is this?
Hmm.
Um, and then yeah, I got my first kind of foot in the door with this place at 343 Industries, and uh, it was a big team, and it was great because I was just like, all right, now I'm going to learn the ropes. I'm going to be
Hmm.
able to kind of ask a lot of questions, and then start to kind of figure out what's going to work for me, what kind of
Hmm.
workflow is going to grow from this, and you're also getting introduced to like, hey, this is a Maya house, so we use Maya here.
Hmm.
And if you're using 3ds Max or something like that, you're going to have to jump off of that, come to Maya. But 343 is pretty good though. They
Mm.
allowed people to use pretty much whatever, but their actual like tool that they would use to work with that engine was
Hmm.
Maya. So you would have
Mm.
to, if you're using 3ds Max, you can do whatever you wanted there, but then you would have to bring things into Maya in order to get it ready to export it out to the Halo engine.
So, what were your
Um,
first kind of duties? Was it to create?
mhm.
What was it like? Because I could ask you. What I mean.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah,
Like,
no,
is
it
it
was.
specific? Was it specifically and like environmental? I don't know. What is it?
Yeah, yeah. What was cool about 343 back in the old days, they put all of the contractors into what was called the doghouse, which was like
Okay.
this. It was like this corner room in this gigantic kind of like
Yeah.
studio
Next to the
space.
bathroom, by
Yeah, they're
the
like, all right,
exit.
all the new guys go in here. We don't want to see you. You just
You stink.
set them aside.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I was put into a group with
Hmm.
others, and it was really cool for them actually for 343 because what they could do is they could put everybody, all of the new talent, into a pool, and then they can start assigning work to people, and then just getting a feel for where they're going to be, good team members on the team, right? Maybe somebody's they have more strength with organics, right? And so you might go work on terrain, right?
Hmm.
Or you might start working on organic sets for a biome. Um,
How long would
or
that take? That process of finding out who belongs where.
oh, I think it was pretty quick. I think after like several weeks,
Hmm.
you might get an assignment to do like prop modeling, for
Mm.
example. They give you a couple hard surface like pieces to work on. I remember, I think the first thing I did was an ammo box that Kenneth Scott had done a bunch of really cool concept
Hmm.
pieces. Um, and Josh Cow, I believe, also had a lot of good concept pieces that they were getting thrown to the doghouse, and those guys were just like, okay, listen, you're going to take this ammo box, you're going to take this healing station, you're going to take just
Yeah.
a bunch of cool
Explain.
stuff.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
explain like between a concept to a final piece. Is there do you have to stick to like exactly the same proportions, the same model, the same like everything as the concept, or are you allowed to have a little bit of artistic freedom there?
Yeah, so those are the kind of questions that when you do get your assignment and when you do get your concept art and stuff like that, those are the kinds of things that you need to ask and kind
Mm.
of get clarity on. Like, hey, how much freedom do I have here? And typically the rule of thumb is that you just match that concept as closely as you can, as best as you can. That's pretty much the baseline. But you might get a art director who's like, hey, listen, here's the piece, but you can follow it pretty closely, but maybe kind of add in and fill in the tertiary details. So like sometimes you might get a concept art piece that doesn't have all the tertiary details in it, or and you need to kind of fill it in, right? And so that's where
Mm-hmm.
you have to use your knowledge about hard surface modeling, the kind of visual language that you see in hard surfacing,
Mm-hmm.
and apply it to that task. Um, but no, at the time it was just trying to match it one for one. And the only other thing I'll say on that though is that sometimes you'll get concept art, and as a 3D modeler, you go to model it, and sometimes there's a loss of translation between the two
Mm-hmm.
because it's 2D to 3D, right? And sometimes you might be trying to model something, and then it's like, hey, when I model it to match the concept, it looks weird from this angle, right? Or it doesn't match up one for one, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's something that is, you will encounter that if you're trying to match concept art sometimes. But you're an artist, right? So you fill in the blanks. You kind of you nudge some verts around to get it to look a little bit
Mm-hmm.
cooler than it actually is, or if there's a problem with that.
Have you
Um,
ever had a something bad happen where you finish something and then I don't know, the concept artist gets a little mad and he wants it exactly like his work and you have to go all the way back to the beginning and
no, I've never had a concept artist march down to my desk and just kind of be like, what do you even do here? Like what is this? Um,
Yeah, I think
no,
most of
but
the time, I'm just saying because people might be like, oh my God, do I have to be exact? A lot of times, concept artists don't even care. They're just like, oh, that's cool. Now my thing's in the game. That's mainly what they care about. If you
yeah, we
do find somebody who's super anal about it, I don't know. That's their problem. But
yeah, I mean,
usually they are pretty cool.
those people probably do exist out there. I've been lucky not to run into any of them, but usually whenever you're going through your process, you're going to be showing your updates to your lead, and
Mm-hmm.
your lead is going to be able to kind of guide you through that process to prevent that exact
Yeah,
situation, I guess, right? Not that is a
that's
that's the
yeah.
thing, but like they might be like, hey, listen, I think this is looking good, but your proportions down here are not lining up too
Mm.
well. Is it a loss of translation between 2D and 3D? Like why does it not look
Mm-hmm.
one for one here? And there might be a good reason for that. Um, or you can explain the problem that you're having to your lead, and your lead will be able to kind of point you in the right direction and kind of be like, okay, well, listen, this is probably what you
Yeah.
should do, right?
Yeah.
Um, but uh, but yeah, I guess to answer your question, yeah, your lead or even the art director can catch these things and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
listen, I want that fixed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a video game production, there's a certain amount of time, right? And so is if it's passing kind of that, hey, if I look at it and it lines up
Mm-hmm.
from that first glance, in most cases, it's just going to go ahead and move forward.
Yeah.
That being said, you should still try to match it as close as you can and put in that extra effort to make sure that
Yeah.
you are bringing that concept to life.
Yeah. Because people notice that thing too, the amount of work and detail people put into stuff. So let's take this opportunity to look at some of your work.
Ooh,
Are you cool
okay.
with that? I pulled up your
Yeah, let's
website.
do
You're
it.
gonna have to explain yourself.
All right, all
What
right.
is this?
I got a list of excuses.
So we are on your ArtStation portfolio, and I will link that on the bottom of this video and all the ways to contact you and your house address and your car license
social
plate
social
and your
security.
social security number. Is there anything here that stands out to you that you want to speak about? What is
uh,
this Dead Drop game? I hear all this stuff
oh
about it.
man, yeah, that game. That's a little known game right
Let's
there.
I think this is kind of one of the earliest pieces. Let's click on that. So I know there was a concept piece similar. Tell me about this little
Yeah,
project right here. You
yeah.
don't have
So
to
that's
talk exactly about this art specifically, just maybe, like
yeah.
what you
Oh yeah, definitely.
tell us about the goal of the environment here.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
your
So
where you drew your inspiration from and things like that.
hmm, yeah, so this is images from kind of our first experience on the Dead Drop kind of game that was
Mm-hmm.
being made. It was referred to as Snapshot One. The idea was that every 8 weeks we would release kind of a chunk of what we were working on to the to our founders and to kind of like our audience and be able to show them like where we are in our process. But for Snapshot One specifically, we wanted to have a series of reveals, like
Mm-hmm.
a series of different moments that the player can get a very good sense of the kind of world that they were going to be entering, as well as kind of start to find our art style
Mm-hmm.
specifically. And so Darren Bacon, the art director, along with Eric Halquist,
Mm-hmm.
one of the coolest concept artists that I've met, uh, kind of started to explore the hideout kind of space
Mm-hmm.
with these uh, awesome pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at a lot of different films. Something that was really um, something we wanted to nail was kind of like the late 80s, early 90s kind of vibe in terms of films. So a lot of the John Carpenter stuff was something that I was looking at
Mm-hmm.
specifically. So like Big Trouble in Little China,
Mm-hmm.
The Thing, like looking at movies like
RoboCop.
uh, RoboCop,
Mm-hmm.
Demolition Man, just the whole plethora of
Mm-hmm.
films from that time, and trying to find like a certain vibe from
Mm-hmm.
those films. Um, some of that had to do with the kind of mood lighting that they were using in those films, but also just like they were gritty. They tend to have like a industrial, kind of factory
Everything is
feel to them.
sweaty.
Very sweaty, very sweaty. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
sweaty and it's on fire somehow.
Yeah, there's always a barrel that's on fire. There's always like some kind of empty warehouse that's filled with trash and the rest
Mm-hmm.
of it. So that was very much the vibe we were trying to go for, and we didn't see that. There's other games that have executed on different art styles very well, but this was like a specific kind of feel that we wanted to do. Where it's like,
So
let's do something a little different, and
yeah. So this
also,
level basically is like the beginning area, which allowed you to experiment your vision for that
yeah.
style.
Yeah, and it was also just a really good exercise to get us familiar with, like you're looking at here, just
Mm-hmm.
Unreal 5 and getting ramped up
Mm.
in Unreal 5, and using things like blueprints, doing some sequences for the
Mm-hmm.
players. So the first time they would enter the gun range, a bunch of lights would kind of kick on, and
Let
you
me
would
see.
hear
I
those
think
lights
it's
kind
up
of turn
here.
on one at a time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
This gives the 100% that vibe.
yeah. Yeah, and so this was a pretty successful reveal right here.
Mm-hmm.
So you get multiple reveals
So
in
like
the
explain, okay,
process.
so explain basically you're from what I understand is you're seeing this as like a movie or like a series of events that draws a character that draws a player to find it interesting. You're trying to create interest. You're trying to create emotion with your
Yeah.
with an environment, and that's something you can't just enter an environment and just start building something. You have to feel like what you are trying to convey, and that's a huge part in the environment. They always say in
Yeah.
movies, oh yeah, the environment was like the fifth character, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what it is. Everything you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about to me falls under the immersion
Mm-hmm.
category. And that is why I'm in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like that feeling, that immersion, like taking a space, doing something with it to make you feel like for a moment there's some escapism that you
Mm-hmm.
get to enjoy. That you're there but not really, right? But yes, that's exactly right. I was trying to kind of convey a sense of immersion and cinematic feel,
Mm-hmm.
and the concepts that we were getting from Eric, the North Star kind of like priorities we were getting from Darren Bacon,
Mm-hmm.
um, was really headed in that direction. So I'm really proud of the Snapshot One work we did
Mm-hmm.
because we had,
This was
I
the
think it was,
concept, looks
mm,
like, from
that's
Darren,
right. Yeah,
and
that's
then
one of Darren's. Yep.
uh, yeah. So he would take the space and concept on top, kind of the
Yeah, we would
vision.
go through
It's
several
very cool.
iterations of just like very quick layouts.
Mm-hmm.
I was also at the time we didn't have a level designer on hand, so I kind of acted as a level designer in the beginning and just kind of tried to keep things
Mm-hmm.
relatively, nothing crazy, just kind of like simple spaces that you can still frame up things like
Mm-hmm.
the tower, right? We wanted to frame up like, hey, this is where you're going. The
Mm-hmm.
player, you are going to use this space that you're in now to train, so that when you go to the tower, you're ready.
You're
Um,
telling a story basically with the environment.
mhm.
It's
Well, I
beautiful.
hope so.
It's
Yeah, I
so
think that was
beautiful.
kind of the intent. And then here are some sequences that were put together from David Prazel.
Mm-hmm.
He was a gameplay designer that joined us about halfway through, I believe, and so he did a lot to kind of further that immersion.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first get off the elevator, you know, you see some crows kind of fly away and they get
Mm-hmm.
scared off. You know, you come out here, you see some choppers that
It's
kind of
always raining. It's always
right.
wet. It's once you added that rain and the fog, it made it jump realism by like 100%.
Yeah, dude, it
Very
helped so
cool.
much. It was also like that was our first attempt at being like, okay, well,
And
let's use
yeah.
because our leadership wanted us to use the marketplace. They were just like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
go out and find things on the marketplace. That's what it's there for, and bring it in.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to shake the old way of doing things, which is that we have to make it all ourselves, which is
Like,
something that, you know, people
yeah.
they don't necessarily like to take, you know, outsourcing or, you know, like asset packs and then
Mm-hmm.
just throw them into their game that they're working on. You know, they're just kind of like, ah, it's kind of like cheating or whatever. But like,
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with that at
No.
all to get
No.
the vibe that you're going for, you know. And if you really wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
if you really wanted to replace that cardboard box later on, you can do that later on. But so this was an example where we used the Unreal Marketplace to grab one of the weather systems. I believe it's
Mm-hmm.
called Ultra
That
Dynamic
gets me to
Sky.
a question is like
Yeah.
when you're thinking of a scene, uh, was this give the idea of like rain and smoke and like how do you layer your scene? Like how do you start and how do you layer your idea? Because you're not just gonna put a floor in a rain. I think there's like levels, right? There's like layers to everything.
Oh yeah, definitely, man.
So
Well, you know,
how do you know what to look for to add? You know, my question is the difference between a pro and not being a pro is knowing what to do to create this like this image, right? This realistic image, this feeling. So how do you think of those things? How do you layer those things on?
yeah. So I mean, a lot of it comes down to just kind of having a good North Star for the project that
Mm.
you're on, right? So your art director really needs to know like what kind of vibe they want the space to be, right? And sometimes they can just say, "Hey, I watched this movie. I think we should shoot for something like this."
Mm-hmm.
And that's great as an artist to hear that because it gives you a lot of flexibility to be like, "All right, well, let me go put together a peer ref board." And to answer your question, a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
is looking at reference. A lot of it is pulling inspiration from specific experiences,
So you start
concept
making a
pieces.
list of I want it to have
Yeah.
rain. I want it to have smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Very
we
cool.
do. You kind of look at your block out and you kind
Mm-hmm.
of you start to kind of apply at least what I like to do is I use lighting to drive a lot of my decision
Mm.
making as an environment artist, you know,
So you
so you could have the
envision your
block out.
lighting and before you kind of start making anything?
Yeah, you can say, hey, you know, let's see what this looks like at sunset,
Mm.
just to see what the vibe's going to feel like in the space. And you got
Mm-hmm.
nothing in there. Doesn't have to be anything in there, but you might use a day-night system to be like, all right, let me see what sunset looks like.
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel when I'm standing here? Right? Oh, it looks kind of cool. We could probably make a pretty cool space and have lots of pop lighting, you know, and stuff like that, emissives that are kind of adding to the space. All right, what does it look like at night? Ah, okay. All right, this is feeling more like a John Carpenter movie now. Let's throw up some
Yeah.
spotlights occasionally of like warm colors or
Eh,
magentas, you know, or something.
So
But
like how long does let's say this scene on screen right now, like how long would that take to create to final? Because I'm sure there's a lot of meetings where
oh yeah.
um
Mhm.
there, for example, the lighting underneath here, there was probably a meeting that said, you know, we want to pop that area a little bit more. Let's add some lights. And
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's probably you're looking at
I'm trying
probably
to
like two.
convey like the idea of how this was created,
Yeah.
but I don't know how to ask that. But like, it's a process basically.
It's a process.
And
No,
it goes
you're doing great.
through
Yeah.
like, you know, block out, and then you start
Hmm.
adding elements to it. And then slowly, after a few weeks of
Yeah.
adding effects and figuring all this stuff, this is what you get. Just like,
Yeah, no, you're
mm-hmm,
onto it, man. Yeah, that's we kind of you start with your block out,
mm-hmm,
and then when you start to go in, you do a little bit of proxy work, what we call proxy work, which is just kind of like taking some very kind of not block out, but a little bit more refined kind of
mm-hmm,
shapes to explore the space, and that might be in the form of girders, right? That might
mm-hmm.
be in the form of staircases. That might be in the form of these kind of walkway kind of
Yeah.
covers that you can see here. Um,
And I
but
mean, going back to what you said, buying like models online to fill your scene while you're blocking out is basically an, the next step of just having gray boxes. You could
yeah,
convey it a little bit faster if you start using like actual models instead of just boxes. So it
yeah,
is a
you don't
benefit.
have to
Yeah.
do proxy by yourself. You can
Yeah.
literally just use the finished asset if you
Mm-hmm.
wanted to and stuff like that. Yeah, whatever's going to help you populate your space. There's no right way to do it
Mm-hmm.
either, so I think it's more about like if you are an
No,
individual working on
Greg,
your
there's
own
only
scene.
one way. You have to do
Yeah.
it one way.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. I mean, because I'm trying to relate this to also what I do, and it's the same thing. You iterate, and you just like the name of my podcast. You keep iterating
I
things,
know.
and
I know.
things get added, things get taken away, and it just becomes what it becomes. And it's also
Yeah.
like a reminder to anyone in the industry is this is kind of like how it is in making games. You can't have like an ego
Yeah.
and stick to your guns like this is how it is. You know,
Hmm.
there's a lot of learning, kind of like emotional learning that you have to do too, especially as an artist, because we're all kind of like, the moody artists.
Oh yeah, we're all maniacs, like it's that's something that is a constant in our
Yeah.
industry. Yeah.
You'll meet some
But you
funny, great guys, but we're all
yeah,
maniacs.
we're all maniacs and you need maniacs to
Yeah.
kind of come together and make something cool. So
Yeah.
it's a very fun process, man. But yeah, no, it's everything you kind of mentioned.
Hmm.
It's revisions. It's a lot of just kind of like, hey, we did a pass on adding um some proxy work in here. We
This
started
is
to kind of
awesome work, by the way. I love this.
oh, thank you, man.
It's so cool.
Yeah, so that's another
Even just
example
like
of the
watching the drips, like this to me is so artsy. I'd rather see this
yeah,
than like
yeah,
that, like a scene like that. I'd rather see, because this is almost like we were talking about Blade Runner. That's sort of what they did in that movie is they would focus on things you normally wouldn't look at and kind of let it play out. And that gives you
that's
that
right.
like moment.
That's right. And you can kind of hone in on any little
Mm-hmm.
corner like this and, have it
Yeah.
have its own sense of character. And you don't have to do something crazy either.
No,
You can be subtle with this stuff,
exactly. I mean, this
you don't
is
have
like
to knock down a wall, but you
four
could.
squares, and it looks beautiful.
Yeah, and so that's another example of that ultra dynamic sky
Mm.
add-on that we got from the marketplace and stuff like that, and
Wow.
it just immediately kind of started to kick in. I
That's
remember
amazing.
for this area, I was watching the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, classic,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of really good compositions in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
The cinematography was really good. And some of the spaces are just you could feel the sweat, as you said, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
feel the sweat of a space, and so yeah, this came together I think in
Here's kind
three
of
to
the
four
block out
months or something. Yeah,
image.
it came out. It was about 3 to 4 months of work with a very
Mm-hmm.
small team. It was me and Eric Halquist, really kind of looking at this outdoor
Yeah.
space,
I
and
was gonna
Eric
get to
doing amazing
yeah.
concept art.
I was gonna
Hmm.
ask you about like what you feel is the difference between like this small team that we had and this, and you worked at a big company,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like what are the pros and cons? What do you feel about that?
yeah, dude. I love working on a small team,
Mm-hmm.
and the biggest reason for that is that there's no time to waste. You kind of just you get going, right? And you also have a very large impact on the product that you're trying to ship. So that is very motivating on a
Mm-hmm.
small team.
For
It's just like, oh
example,
wow.
yeah, for example, the car experience. It was
Oh yeah, the Tower Run. Yep.
yeah, it was basically tell us about it.
Yeah, the Tower
Let's
Run was
go
a
down to, I think your concept or your map starts here. So we can let's
Oh,
talk.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the third iteration. There's some really poorly done drawings of like
Mhm.
kind of tracks and like pathing
Yeah.
and everything. But yeah, the Tower Run, just to give people context, is that the Tower Run was it's meant to be a replacement for a load screen
Mhm.
or the kind of like repeating animation load screen that you would see in other games while everybody's
It,
matchmaking.
yeah, and it
Um,
took about 6 months to finish. I'm
this
not.
thing right here.
Yeah, or less.
Oh
I don't
no,
remember.
this came together over the course of I think it was 3 or 4 months of work.
Yeah.
See, 8 to 12 weeks, of actual just like racing to the end, no pun
Mhm.
intended, because we had
What
to.
did, which is what we were. The original thing was we were talking about small teams and how quickly we can get
Yes,
things going, and
yep,
this is a pure example of that. And yeah, I just wanted to get into some details of that. So sorry, I
yeah.
cut you off
So
here.
no, you're good, man. You're great. No, a
Yeah.
small team. The beautiful thing about the small team is that there's no red tape. There's
Mm-hmm.
no bureaucracy, and that's extremely important for creative endeavors. And if you have a team that who all just want to make something good together, and
Mm-hmm.
if the culture is good, if people kind of understand the North Star that's being laid out by your leadership team, um, then you can move pretty quick and kind of know where you need to be covering down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I
It
love about a
helps you
small team.
innovate as well because of what
Mhm.
we're looking at now. That you built this spline road tool
Yeah,
system.
so this tool was made by our tech artist named Dustin
Mm-hmm.
Rogers,
Mm-hmm.
and Dustin is amazing
Genius.
procedural uh, tech artist, man. Yeah, he's a Houdini guy, but he made this spline tool for us, and it uses data tables that allows us to just kind of be like, okay, you pick your art assets,
Mm.
right? So in this case, I have a repeating road section that I've made. I've got some trash assets that we got off the marketplace, and that tool just allows you to plug in a bunch of stuff that adheres to a
Mm.
spline over time. So you can literally be like, okay, I have 4 different data tables, and each one of them looks like a different road. That's
Mm-hmm.
all it means.
Mm.
But this is the kind of, you know, innovative
Yeah.
thinking that, we had to come up with and say, how are we going to make a racing experience?
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to just focus on creating a racetrack design and kind of working on that. Um,
So
and there are
working with
some,
a like an environment that will see cars flying through, did you have to constantly test it to see how it was working with the current vehicle?
yeah, it was more like the vehicle was in a working state, and
Mm-hmm.
so you were able to to like drop in the vehicle anywhere you needed to, so that you can test out some of your design, your racetrack design. So we started experimenting with kind of what you have on screen here, the
Mm-hmm.
the ramps, and
Mm-hmm.
being like, well, how is it just going to be a racing thing? It could just be a racing thing. Is there anything else that we want to add to are there going to be multiple paths, for example, right? And so with these jumps, we can make it a little bit more fun for the player, and that was kind of a big thing. Like our founders probably were not expecting a racing experience. So if we were going to do that, we would need to make it be pretty fun or just enjoyable so that while they're loading in, it's not just a race track with no jumps, no
Mm-hmm.
nothing, So we are looking for ways to kind of explore that, Um, but yeah,
It
so mhm.
it was also like, I mean, it did a lot more than just do that. I think it added to, again, the lore of the game,
Yeah.
the story without having a story, and that's kind of like fast development. You have things that are in place, something, and sometimes you do not. So in a lot of ways, you're creating the lore as you're making it.
Yeah, because I remember leadership came to us and they're like, "Hey, we want to do a racing experience because the vehicles were a big part of kind of the hideout idea that
Mm-hmm.
you would have a garage and it would be just this really cool space, and you'd have your Mad Max vehicle and all of
Mm-hmm.
that." So naturally, it kind of played into exploring this idea. So, but yeah, it's another one of these things that came together quickly, and that's the other part about being on a small team is like you can move pretty quickly, because there is no bureaucracy. It's not a big team. Big teams, by the way, are just fine. There's nothing wrong with a big team or anything like that. I'm not trying to say that there's like a lot of bureaucracy, but the more people you have on a team, there's like, hey, let me check with so and so. Let me make
Mm-hmm.
sure this is okay. Let's look at the design doc. There's a checklist of things and responsibilities that you have that they're there for a reason. But on a smaller team, hey, in this case, it's like, hey, go explore a skybox for the cold storage palette. What does it look like? It's an
Mm-hmm.
industrial space. We want it to feel cold, and then I can just go and mess around with that concept, and this is what you get. So
Wow.
that stuff was a
It's
lot of fun
beautiful.
too.
I mean, I'm jumping subjects, but this makes me think about like how this engine allows movies to have these amazing backgrounds and things. That have you ever thought about going to movies and creating backdrops and things like that? Because I think a lot of the industry is going towards using Unreal. Like I know Star Wars, they have the volume and a lot of the backgrounds for the Mandalorian were used with
Yeah.
an Unreal Engine, which is insane. So
Hmm.
it's like there is an avenue there somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like
I feel like those technologies are merging basically. So
yeah,
maybe like
yeah.
the industry won't be as crazy because those same people could be moved around just entertainment, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think there's probably a lot of cross pollination and stuff like that. I mean, even the animator that was on our team came from Avatar
Mm,
and went from working on film to just jumping right into games, and uh, similar kind of like approach. But for me personally, like you see in these shots, I like a cinematic feel to games. So
mm-hmm.
like I think um as long as I can kind of explore that and create that through sequences using Unreal, and like you were saying, Unreal, it just makes it to where yeah, you can create something pretty cinematic pretty quickly and see what it looks like in a sequence and or a cutscene, right? And it will just reinforce what you're trying to achieve, or it will reinforce whether or not you're done too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes as artists, we want to keep going. We want to keep working on
Yeah.
on that thing and make it perfect, right? But you'll never get there unless if you have a good understanding of when you can kind of let it go and just kind of be like, hey, it's where it needs to be. It's at the polish phase, right? And you can set it down and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is also just a very important skill to have.
Yeah.
Like like I think something that took me a long time to learn was being able to kind of let go of your babies, a little bit
Yeah.
and just kind of detach from it a little bit and just remember that you're making a product, and that it's not, you want to inject all the cool visuals that you can, and you want to inject as much as of your heart into that thing that you can, and be a little bit selfish with it, right? When it's appropriate, but then also be ready to kind of like, okay, if this isn't working, it's got to go. If your art director says, hey, you know what, that's cool, but we're gonna go a different way,
Mm-hmm.
just be prepared to kind of just say okay and let it go. Um,
Take it as a learning experience.
yeah, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is that these cinematics right here, like it gave me the good, kind of um, way of like just kind of problem solving and saying like, oh, you know what, this feels good, this feels done,
Plus,
and
in
if
games, you're worried more about like real time. So
yeah,
it is better to test it all the time and see how that works, in real time.
Yeah.
Because this
Yeah.
wouldn't be just an image. This would be moving and rotating and parallaxing, and the lighting especially has to work whichever way you're looking at something,
Mm.
whichever direction you're looking. So it is more of a complex issue because you're creating a real space, but you're basing it on these kind of little tests where you're testing your lighting and everything. It's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um,
Sector 3.
yeah, Sector 3, that was our um
Let yeah. Let's go in more
sorry, go ahead.
into let's forget environment.
Okay. Yeah.
And let's
I'm
go
with you
into
there. I'm done.
some of your hard surface stuff here. This is awesome. Let's look at this crate. Very
Oh yeah,
cool.
the infamous
This
military crate.
this took you 2 seconds to make
Took me
because you're
4
so
years
fast.
actually. No, yeah, it's I
That's
really
something. For example, what we can say is a lot of times you might get something boring to make,
Mhm.
but you can, take that as a. How would you take that? Let's say something. I'm not saying this is boring. I'm just saying it's like an everyday object
Simple.
that somebody's made like a
Yep.
thousand times. How do you go about that?
Yeah, well, so I guess I should start by saying that like I love prop modeling. I love it. I love
Mm-hmm.
taking one subject and just something as simple as a crate. That is literally the my crate that I had in the army that I took with
Nice.
me and stuff like that. And I still have it sitting in the corner of my room somewhere. Um, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I've always just really kind of enjoyed the just like that 3D look to things. Like I know a lot of people try to match realism as close as possible. You'll
Mm-hmm.
probably notice with my work, I like a grounded, realistic feel to things, but I don't want
Mm-hmm.
it to be like a photograph either.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to still feel like a 3D kind of element. Um,
Yeah,
so I really enjoy it,
nothing
and
should be perfect. Everything, the more realistic you want
yeah,
something, that's a note for anyone who wants to create something real.
yeah.
The more dirty and beat up it is, the more real it looks.
Sure, go and go do some photogrammetry, but I really enjoy kind of just taking one item here, and this is a good
Mm-hmm.
example too. This is
Yeah.
essentially it's a space crate, is what it is, right? But
Yeah.
there's a really cool concept piece that was made for
Mm-hmm.
it, and it was like, wow, this is cool. It's made up of I can see this being broken down into multiple pieces,
Modular.
and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I can make it a little bit modular. Maybe we can set it up to be a destructible asset, so when it takes damage, it'll explode into all these different pieces.
Mm-hmm.
But I really relish these kinds of items, and I love
Yeah.
to make them come to life.
This is what
Um,
somebody once referred to, because where I was working once, as gold, because you can break it up and put it in as many places on the map, and it's still
that's
the
right.
same
That's
object,
right.
but anywhere you look at it, it looks different, so it gives you variety. So that's like,
Absolutely.
if you can create an object that gives the environment artist variety as much as it can, and by using one object, that's like a great key. It's like gold.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right, man. That is a really successful piece that
Mm-hmm.
for on Halo 5 when we were kind of working on the Oni palette. It's just like, okay, well you got the one crate now. You got
Mm-hmm.
the one thing knocked out so that it can be used in any multiple ways. And so, like you said, instead of having one asset, you have four
Mm-hmm.
or even five, depending on what you're trying to do with it. Um, so that was a whole lot of fun, man.
That's cool.
But yeah, I do like simple kind of like, getting back to the crate,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a simple object,
Mm-hmm.
and I had an obsession of just like, when you get into the industry and like you're green and everything, just like this crate is, um, you're like, oh, I want to make an ammo crate, the iconic kind of, objects that you would typically find in any
Mm-hmm.
game, first person shooter. And I really just enjoy that a lot. And so through the years, what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll try to redo just like a simple pelican case
Mm,
kind of object, and just I really like the kind of hard surface feel to it and everything. And then of course, depending on what program you're using, you can really set up a nice little backdrop and everything and kind of put it together. Or in my case, I was making pelican cases and putting them on turbo squid,
that's awesome.
to kind of get in a little bit of a, you kind of train up that skill set too, so that if you wanted to, maybe you want a side gig, right? You want to put some stuff up on CG Trader, or you want to put something up on Turbo Squid or something like that. And they have a whole, thing that you got to follow and rule set. So you get to learn a little bit more about that process. But I have no issue just, modeling everyday items and kind of bringing them to life, just like
That's funny.
that pumpkin project that you were looking at too. That was
I'm
actually,
going back to the crate. I had a quick thought. Like somebody could make their whole portfolio just a bunch of different crates.
yeah,
It's like I'm the crate
definitely.
guy,
Yep. Yeah,
which would
definitely.
be
And I think,
cool. I mean, I'm like I want to do that now. Make a bunch of
yeah.
crates.
Mm.
Let's see the pumpkin. Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
this
same
is
thing.
more about, let's talk more about the like texturing and things like that. And like, how do you go about that?
Oh man. I think
How
for
do you
that,
do that? Just
how do you,
because
where do you
this, for
start?
example, this piece is kind of perfect to illustrate your knowledge of different texture examples. So this is something students or somebody applying somewhere could show off, like, hey, I can do different textures from organic to like hard surface metals, you know.
Yeah, I think to kind of sum that up pretty easily is that it's there there is an artist named Josh Lynch,
Mm-hmm.
and he is an infamous, like, just awesome, surfacing artist. And
Mm-hmm.
I got a chance to work with him over at Monolith, but he always says that it needs to pass the scratch test. Like if you can imagine running your fingers along a surface, and if it passes that kind of test in in your mind or in your
Mm-hmm.
render, right, wherever you land on it, then it's successful.
Mm.
But obviously it's made up of many different techniques of just kind of like, you might be a substance designer guy, you might be a substance painter guy, you might just go ahead and use textures from textures.com. But yeah, it just depends on the subject matter that you're working on, and then you're just trying to kind of replicate it through um, the use of bump maps and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. This was a scene in Blender, so most of that material is not even a texture set. It's just using different kind of displacement nodes
Oh
to kind
wow.
of create the little bump offset and all that kind of stuff, but then
And
also drive color through that as well.
so is
Mhm.
this, these are ways for you to like learn new techniques and new software? Because I know, when did you get into Blender?
Been using Blender now for about
5,
five, 6 years,
6 years.
and
It's
you
sort of
know,
a
I
new like player in the industry.
well, it's been around for a
It's
very long
been
time. It's
really.
been around for like 20 years or something like that. Like it's
When was
very
this
old.
flip? Because I think I
Yeah,
remember using it,
yeah.
and it was impossible to understand. But now there's like a shift where like it's so easy to learn it.
Yeah, well, I think in recent years, like some of the free alternative softwares they're getting to a place now where they are very user friendly. Like
Mm-hmm.
DaVinci, for example, if you wanted to get into like video editing,
Mm-hmm.
but Blender is great. Blender is wonderful, and the amount of plugins that are available on the Blender marketplace uh, can help you speed up your workflow
Mm.
in any number of ways. Now, don't get me wrong. Maya's great. I still love Maya a lot. I love the markup menus, and I miss it, on a production in a lot of ways. But Blender is just, in my personal opinion, it's, number one, it's free. Okay, so you don't need to pay a license for it if you're not working or you're in between jobs, or you're even for the job you're working at. But like it's very, very powerful, and
It's
it's definitely at that
robust.
place now
Yeah.
where anybody can pick it up. You
Yeah.
don't need that's getting back to the whole AI thing. Those for-profit schools like Noman, wonderful. They're helpful, and you can really learn a lot from them. But with YouTube and something like Blender, anybody can
Mm-hmm.
get into it now, and it's a
Yeah.
wonderful thing to have. But yeah, Blender was
That's something that keeps
yeah.
popping up over and over, is how lucky people are
Hmm.
today to have these. you don't even know. Like you would have to spend thousands of dollars
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
information that's now just free online.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Uh,
crazy. And that's,
yeah.
we were talking about the Gnomon workshop earlier, like when we were going through school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, well, you would need to buy those things to understand
Yeah. I bought
vehicle
mine on
production, right?
eBay because they were cheaper.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And what was available on YouTube at the time when YouTube was still fresh, I mean, it was only a couple of years old and everything. So
It's like,
there wasn't a whole
yeah,
lot
there was
out there. And
nothing.
so
Yeah.
now is a wonderful time for anybody to
Mm-hmm.
like get into it and really start to kind of flex
And
that
like you
artistic
said,
kind of vision.
yeah, like you said, you should really start getting into the plugins of everything and like the add-ons because there's so many things that you can create your own little workflows and your own, speed enhancements that it's totally worth building that up, that little toolbox.
Yeah, exactly. You can cater it to your workflow, and you
Mm-hmm.
can really, explore a lot of different configurations with those plugins, and
Mm-hmm.
figure out what works best for you and what you're trying to do. Um, so I like to use Blender pretty default though. I like to
Mm-hmm.
keep it default. That's just my style, but there are plenty of the plugins
Me
that I
too.
utilize all the time, and especially for renaming your objects, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Like if you're working on an Unreal pipeline, you have your geometry, but then you also have the collision for that geometry, and it has to be named a certain way. And there's a Blender plugin that does it with one click of a
Wow.
button. So it's very very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so it's an exciting time to really kind of be jumping into this stuff. And what is there's a Photoshop alternative that's free too. I forgot the name of it, but
Korea.
um, nah, that's the AI.
Oh, I
But
have it. Let me see. Krita.
oh, okay,
Krita.
nice.
Yeah.
But those are getting better.
Yeah.
Like those are getting better all the time. And I know
Mm-hmm.
Photoshop has its fancy new AI and all that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
everything. I think
What do
like
you think about
yeah,
AI then, like in your workflow? Because I
yeah. Let's
know we
talk about
use
it.
a lot of, I mean, for now,
Yeah.
just, I mean, it's not like I'm hiding anything. We're using it as concept and help with the concepting of things. And now that AI, every week there's like a new tool that enhances how you use AI. So now you can even customize your initial concept. See, there's like all these levels of using AI. So to me, it's more of a tool. But how would you use it in your work?
Yeah, I think number one is that like I know there's controversy around AI with
Mm-hmm.
like hey it's going to replace jobs, and like it's not cool to use AI for your artwork and stuff like that. My personal opinion on that is that it's a tool like anything else. And if you are on a very small team and you got one or two concept artists, you might have all the support you need, like
Mm-hmm.
and be fine with that. But if you're kind of on your own and you're doing your own project or something like that, well, then you might use Mid Journey to generate some ideas for you for your inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not meant for you to copy it one for one. It's meant to kind of help you get an idea of what you might want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe some kind of interesting subject matter that you can then put into a composition in your own work.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's helping you kind of figure out what you want to do.
Yeah,
um,
I've used it for
so
color help.
mm,
Like I'll plug in some kind of image and ask it to give me some color information.
yeah. Yeah, and it comes up with some
Yeah,
pretty interesting stuff that's all really cool and everything, but it's also just kind of like, what are you going to do with it, right? Like, of
you have
course, if
to
you just,
know kind of at this point. You
mm,
kind of have to know how to use it.
yeah,
You can't just take it out of the box. There's a lot of things that you need to do to actually make it a workable item.
yeah. And
Workable
I
asset or something.
personally, I use
Mm-hmm.
Crea.ai,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really cool because of how interactive it is. You can feed it images, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can use a slider to determine how much of an AI like kind of um, influence you want to
Mm.
have on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes your typical prompt keywords, and then you can
Mm-hmm.
also use a slider to kind of determine how much AI support you want. You can really get dialed into the thing that you're looking for, right? Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
working on like some back alleyway and you just want some, help me out with some, kind of ideas around that, visual
Mm-hmm.
ideas. And then you still got to make it in 3D anyway, so like it's a tool to help you.
Yeah.
But Pinterest is still the goat. There's plenty of stuff on Pinterest. I know
I was just
I
gonna
know
say
that
you're aging yourself with this AI stuff. There's
yeah,
like by the time we're like
yeah.
in 10 years, that's gonna be something insanely different.
Yeah, I mean, my go-to is still Pin. What I do is I use
Yeah.
Pinterest first. I use Peer Ref for all my reference gathering, which is
Mm-hmm.
of course the standard that a lot of people go to, right? Peer Ref is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of pull in your influences that you want to use, and I get stuff directly from film. I get stuff directly from Pinterest, and then the tertiary to that is like a Crea.ai of
Mm-hmm.
just like a couple of like a couple of North Star pieces of like this creates a feeling or a
Mm-hmm.
vibe, and I want that to be included in the piece that I'm working on. And so that for me has been a very successful use
Mm-hmm.
of AI. But outside of that, I haven't. There's so many of them now, and I'm sure they're just going to keep getting better. But
Mm-hmm.
I think for anybody watching this, you should definitely use
Nobody.
it to help you with your workflow. Just find a way to get it to where it can
Yeah.
help you with your workflow.
I
Don't
mean,
you
for
obviously don't
example,
just use it, but
yeah.
one for
What
one. But you
I
shouldn't
was
shy away from things that will help your
I
process.
was gonna say there's kind of two types of AI going on right now. The Photoshop AI, it can be generative, but it's also an easy way to like mask things out, remove background elements. So it's more of a tool than to generate something from scratch, where
Yeah.
it would take, So I think that direction of use of AI to help you create an image that already exists is a great tool. But like for me, I've never actually used anything completely generated. It's always gone through a process or
Yeah.
a iteration on that.
Yeah, you might need, for example, an environment artist might need some help with their lighting or
Mm-hmm.
something. And so, you can plug that into Crea to get you some ideas to kind of help with
Mm-hmm.
it, and keywords to be like, oh, okay, I can drop in a couple of more lights on this one side of the composition, kind of more visually pleasing to the eye. The eye
Mm-hmm.
wants to go there and it moves through the space. And so it's an aid. Um, oh man, you're going through all the old Halo stuff.
Mm-hmm. So as talking about, I know in DeadDrop we were using, what is it called, where you can like have a billion polygons on something.
Yeah, so we were using the features of Unreal 5, which
Mm-hmm.
was something that our leadership wanted us to
What was that
use
called?
and
That
explore. It was
that
called Nanite. You're
nanite.
for yeah.
So what
Hmm.
my kind of what I'm trying to get to is like, so this the process of making this Halo map and the process of making the Dead Drop map were completely different because of the nanite implementation you were using for Dead Drop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
And
there's a lot of
this technique, can you compare those or talk about it a little bit?
yeah, definitely, man.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought process for how the map is built is
Mm-hmm.
actually pretty similar. All
Mm.
the kind of like approach to how you would take a map and then start breaking it off into its pieces to say, all
Mm.
right, we're going to do palette development around these different areas. We're going to pull in some good reference and all that kind of stuff. That's all still the same, but Nanite itself. Uh, just kind of what it does is it gives you the ability to go as pretty heavy with your geometry and start to take advantage of kind of like you know getting detail into the meshes directly as opposed to relying on something like a trim sheet, for example. So for the old school Halo stuff, we had to be smart about our triangle count. We had to
Mm.
maintain, I believe it's like under 20,000 or something like that for our triangle count. But that's way too high as well. You'd want to get it down as low as you can go, So like a wall would be just something
Wow.
very straight, like, 64 triangles kind of thing. Um, but not everything. Like the Halo engine actually it did pretty good with geometry. Actually, you can have a couple of pretty like high triangle count items
Mm.
in your scenes, and it would do just fine. But when it came to DeadDrop and working in Unreal 5, well, now it's like, all right, well, you might have used a trim sheet to kind of, you know, you might have used the trim sheet kind of workflow. And for anybody who uses that will understand what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
where you take a shape and you're trying to kind of quickly get detail kind of put on it with your use of UVs and
Mm-hmm.
your edges and where you're putting it on the geometry. And with nanite, you could technically, you don't even need the trim sheet. You can literally just use the displacement from that trim sheet directly onto the
Mm.
geometry itself. And you don't need to rely on being tied to like a trim sheet material, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Um, so that's what we tried to do. What we tried to do was say, okay, if it's detail that can be directly modeled in, uh, take advantage of nanite. And so that took several months of really kind of experimenting with it and kind of determining, okay, what's too high? When does it turn into 20 megabytes on disk and 40
Mm-hmm.
megabytes on disk? And we found, I believe Dustin Rogers, if he was here, he would tell me, but I believe it was around like 80,000 triangles on any given mesh, right?
Mm.
Would maintain it around like either 2 to 8 megabytes or something like that. But the second that you went over like 80,000, 90,000 triangles, uh, the price on disk starts to jump like crazy.
Wow.
So even though nanite's amazing, and they're like, oh, look at this tech demo shows a statue that's 54 million triangles
Mm-hmm.
nanite, or whatever.
It's
It's like,
got its
yeah, but
use case, I feel
it's going to be very
like.
expensive. Yeah,
Yeah,
like as far as on
you
disk,
have
and
to, yeah, play
yeah,
like before. That's
yeah,
like a system wide decision, right? Like you have to
yeah.
decide, do you want to go, it's like a fork in the road. Do you want to go nanite, or you want to go the old way of, the the old way of doing things?
Yes,
And
absolutely,
did you
absolutely.
feel like that was a, was there was there any rollback for that? I don't remember if there was, like, you had to change it,
Well,
or what did you learn
well,
from that experience?
so we were trying to use nanite. We were
Yeah.
trying to use the features of Unreal 5.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about nanite, you're talking about Lumen, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, it doesn't come without its own set of problems and learnings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So nanite's wonderful. I got no issues with nanite. I think it's great. It also, kind of frees you up to put very good looking geometry into your game, and for in most cases little cost, and that's great. But with Lumen turned on, Lumen is a direct impact to performance just out of the box.
Mm.
So if you're working on something like a first person shooter, like we were, we often found that we were running into issues with performance because Lumen had an upfront cost. So you then have to go into the game of figuring out what you can do with your content to make it more performant friendly as much as you
Mm-hmm.
can. And there are some things that Unreal does very well, and there's other things that, just like every other engine out there, it's
Mm-hmm.
got its list of things, right? And so Unreal 5 is very popular, and I still think it's the way to go for new games. I'm a big fan of it. Um,
I mean,
but you have
yeah.
to still have a reasonable approach to when you're taking a level and when you are breaking it down into its chunks. You do need to have a very sober take about how you're going to put content into the game so that when you're not looking at an area, other stuff is dropping off behind you, and you're not paying the cost of that. With
I
Dead
feel,
Drop,
yeah, I feel
yeah,
like that's like a question of the type of game as well. Like,
yeah,
if you want to use super high res, like you said, as a statue or something, maybe it's
mhm,
not in a very fast paced action FPS. Maybe it's like
yeah,
just part of a single player story where, that's the focus or something. So it's like knowing your game and knowing what tech is the best for that type of game. And, we learn a lot of things from that. And, our next project should be better for it.
yeah. I think so, man. I think so. There's definitely a lot of learnings with
Mm-hmm.
Unreal. one file per actor was another big one too, where it broke from the old tradition of having sub levels essentially, where you would take a map, you'd break it up into these sub levels, and only one person could work on those
Mm-hmm.
areas at a time.
Mm.
And so it was kind of like checking out a book at the library where you had to wait until it was checked back in from somebody else. Well, one file per actor, for example, allows multiple users to just kind of work in the same space at the same time, and you're kind of each actor that you move around the space is its own book that you check out from the library. So it was really a game changer to allow us to explore some different
Mm-hmm.
workflows and everything, and in a very short period of time as well.
So
Like each
like,
one of these snapshots was very ambitious.
yeah.
8 weeks is, I mean, it just flies right by. So
Mm-hmm.
you're going and going and going, and you're trying to take learnings and be like, how can we configure this into a workflow
Mm-hmm.
for new team members that join us down the road? And that was a very big challenge for us. Like it was very difficult to kind of land on something that was going to, stand the test of time,
Mm-hmm.
because we would also learn new things along the way. So,
And we
but
constantly
nanites,
were adjusting, and performance was the main, uh,
yeah, performance was
goal.
huge.
Yeah.
Performance was huge. We're like, you got to at least hit like something reasonable, like a 60 frames a second.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some areas that are really good about it. Of course, you're looking in a corner of like a hallway. Yeah, you're going to be fine. You're going to be hitting 60 or 50 to 60, no problem,
Mm-hmm.
depending. But the one last thing I wanted to say about nanite, just really quick,
Mm-hmm.
is that nanite, what it also does for you is that it increases, obviously, the amount of triangles you can use on an asset before it's converted to nanite. Um, and with that, you could also bring in a lot of vertex color information. Since there's more geometry, you have more vertex color information that you can use for your shaders, for example. And that was one area where we took advantage of that. And Dustin Rogers, our tech artist, and Oscar Dianda, another awesome environment artist on the team, really worked together so that what we could do is we can have just one metal for the entire game in terms of our materials, right? So you were asking about surfacing earlier.
Mm-hmm.
This would be a good example of that, where we said, hey, we want to have one metal for everything, and it's made up of 4 layers.
Mm-hmm.
So like, hey, you scratch away at it, you see the bottom layer, the top layer is like your paint, or your dirt. So you got the metal, you got the
Mm-hmm.
paint, you got the dirt. Um, because when we were trying to fix our performance, one of the key things that we had to do was reduce our material IDs in the game. So what that means is that when you're making a game, you have a bunch of different materials that you can pull from. You're like, oh, we got this material, I'm going to drop it here, I'm going to drop it there, I'm going to, but really you might be able to get away with just using the same material over and
Mm-hmm.
over again. But you're using vertex color information to drive which layers are exposed, or you're using custom data to be like, hey, I want the paint for this object to be red, but it's using the same material.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the things that was a really good learning for us, that did allow us to attempt to, hey, let's help performance. Let's reduce material IDs. Let's be smart about how we make things for our world so that we have our, one concrete for, things
Mm-hmm.
until we absolutely needed a second one, until we absolutely need a second concrete. But the idea was having a lot of flexibility in those materials. So anyway, sorry, I'm
No,
rambling.
I think it's great to limit
Yeah.
yourself in that way, where that concrete is concrete, and the way that it layers and uses does it use the channels as far as what you're exposing, which layer you're exposing?
Yeah, so what it would do is you would have a shader, and then
Mm-hmm.
it would have a stack order for its layers. And so for each one of those, you could have what's called custom data,
Mm-hmm.
and turn on custom data for those layers. So for
Mm.
example, if you have, a concrete wall and there's a paint layer on that material, you could select that wall, go to your custom data, and then there'd be a vertex color picker for you, and you can be like, oh, I want this wall to be a
Mm.
painted red concrete wall, you know. So it was about being smart about packing as many of those kinds of things that you can think of
Mm-hmm.
for those scenarios, and be like, well, you know, you don't need 32 different texture sets for concrete, you know. Yeah,
Right.
like that's something that in the old school was a problem,
I
you know. You would,
remember,
you
yeah.
know.
I remember
Mhm.
you used it on a barrel, the fire barrel, and you were able to change it to different colors and
Oh, right. Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. Hmm.
Very cool. It's all about being smart at how you build things, and you only get
Yeah.
those techniques by just failing upwards, learning from your failures.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Learning from failures and just,
Yeah.
well, definitely just trying some things, and then like, yeah, you know, making the decision to make your situation better as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes in a production, you might be so far along that you can't change foundational
Mm-hmm.
things about shaders, for example, or so yeah, you're right. You got to fail fast. You got to like
Mm-hmm.
just run through it and fail like as quickly as you can on like, okay, this is what we think is going to be a good shader setup. And then, you know, you go through the different iterations and you get it to a place that's like, okay, this is going to work on a production setting. This is going to work on a
Mm-hmm.
production line, which is the job at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you're making a product, and it's a product, and it goes along the assembly line. And so your job as an artist should always be to, how can I make this step on this production line be as efficient as possible,
Mm-hmm.
that also solves problems for not just myself, but the people
That's a
downstream,
great point.
you
Yeah.
know? Um,
You're not
so I
only
think,
building the game, you're also building the techniques of how you're building the game. That way, whoever comes into your team or, you leave for some reason, they can always pick up and go from your technique, from your
sure.
workflows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, we got really lucky on Dead Drop, because everybody that
Mm-hmm.
we brought in really brought some solid solutions to the table. And that's the other thing I love working on a small team. You know, like it's there's only a few people, and like, you guys are responsible. Hey, you're the environment artists. There's four of you guys. How are you going to put a
Mm-hmm.
game out? You know, and it's just like, okay, great. Let's talk about it and let's get into the details about it. And the good
It's good to
ideas
have
can
that
come from anybody.
knowledge. Yeah, it's good
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
you're so familiar with these kinds of things. This is what you know what to look for to make your process faster, and that only comes with time and whoever is your leadership or whoever is mentoring you or whatever. But
yeah,
they
and
don't
then once you
teach
get
you.
through
Do
that
they
stuff,
teach you that stuff at school? Like, remember, this is only gonna be, model this, but you only have like a day to
I
finish.
think with school it was good, because the instructors that I had, they were very good about letting you know the kind of lifestyle you're going to be getting into. You know, like letting you know that it's like, hey, this is going to be a
Yeah,
job that is going to be hard work. You're going to be working a lot of
yeah.
hours, and through that process, you're going to figure out how to develop a workflow that's faster and faster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you are taking initiative and trying to solve your problems in that way.
I
Um,
remember at
but
school when we would get homework, go finish your model, whatever. You would know exactly who is into it and who's not, because you'd have people complaining, oh, I can't do it in one day. I have this to do, or that, there's always excuses.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like, that's not how it really works.
Yeah, you don't get
Yeah.
to come to, the table and not have stuff ready to go when the deadline shows up. You know, it's
Yeah.
tough. But it's you kind of, you have to set reasonable scope as well.
Yeah.
I think that is paramount. That's another thing. Being on a small team, you can punch above your weight against larger studios. You
Mm-hmm.
can do it, but your scope needs to be something that is reasonable with the team that you have. And that is something that, if something is out of scope, it doesn't
Mm.
matter how good your team is. If it's out of scope, you're gonna be crunching. You're gonna be trying to get to that goal, and your workers are gonna get tired. So
Yeah.
you need to have a very, I'd say, common sense approach to game development. So find proceduralized tools, develop proceduralized tools that's going to build your world faster for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you can, work with your level designers to Get on a modular system. Freeform design is really cool if you have 3 years of
Mm-hmm.
production in front of you. If you have 6 months, freeform design
Yeah.
needs to be uh, probably left at the door, and you're using a Lego set to
Mm-hmm.
design your maps. Because then that way the people behind you can just easily replace it. But it all depends on the product you're making and
Yeah.
stuff. And it's a fun adventure, man. I consider myself a workaholic, so I live in this world and I really enjoy it and obsess over it, probably unhealthily, but
No, it
uh,
shows like
so
the amount of stuff I've learned off of you just listening to you guys. But that takes me to the next kind of final thoughts. Like, what dream project from present or past would you have loved or love to work on?
well, sheesh, man. I think for that, like, I a dream project was like Halo for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I was very fortunate to be able to take part in helping to create that universe, the environments for it, and um, it was a dream and it came true. Like it was really cool, man. But I think if there was something else,
Mm-hmm.
like if there was something else in the future to tackle and kind of go after,
Like I
you
know,
know,
okay, so for example,
um,
DEADROP is sort of like
yeah,
a city vibe and like grunge, and Halo was futuristic and sci-fi. Like,
yeah.
what's another
Mhm.
type of setting that you like to explore?
Yeah, I think the medieval period is also a wonderful, kind of a time to explore in terms of aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'd love to work on like kind of like a fantasy game, but not like a fantastical, not like
Mm.
uh, not too fictiony, just more like, history, like
Mm-hmm.
more old castles that really existed kind of thing. Like there is a game out there called Crusader Kings. It's very addictive. It's a very fun Sims meets, conquer the world kind of a game. But it has really cool aesthetics,
That's
right?
cool.
And so I think anything that kind of is around that era of the Crusades would be
Mm-hmm.
something that would be really fun to kind of
Because
dive into.
yeah, you play a lot of different games. I think like
I do. Yeah.
RTS. I know you play RTS to like uh, TF2 or whatever, like first person games.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I got like 670 titles on my Steam account.
Yeah.
So like I
I always
I
used to.
I
I
play
also
way too many
go.
games. Yeah.
Yeah, I also go for like the odd type games, just to get away from the normal like everyday type games. So I like to explore
Yeah.
those as well. Like I was out of like recently I noticed I'm not as interested in the story of games. I'm more interested in like playing, and I kind of skip the stories. But I'm trying to go back to like liking the story. So I started Death Stranding, and I'm like making myself sit through all the
Oh,
cinematics.
nice. Yeah, there's a lot there, man. There's a lot of story with that. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah, for me
Yeah.
it's Cyberpunk. I
Mm-hmm.
bought Cyberpunk when it first came out, and I love that team over there. They do amazing work, and
Yeah.
I think I played like 4 hours, but it had a lot of bugs. It had performance issues at the time, but now it's pretty well ironed out as of this recording. It's pretty well ironed out. So if you
Mm-hmm.
were to play the game right now from scratch, it's a very good experience, and that's something I'd like to kind of dive back into.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, and then I think the other thing, just really quick, to kind of go back to your question about just like what would you want to work on, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. I think for me, I think there's uh, my personal take is that there are classic games that have been made way back, and like in the 90s and stuff like that, that they were really good games at their core, and they
Mm-hmm.
had to be good games at their core in order to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
um, and some of those games, some of those IPs that are just kind of sitting there, like They just need a modern version of the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
not changing it or anything like that, but just taking that original thing, bringing it forward, having a team that kind of, understands it, respects it, and wants to modernize it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would also be something really exciting to kind of dive into is working on kind of like a older game that kind of, needs a modern version and can be kind of brought into, like Unreal, right? And
Mm-hmm.
take advantage of all the benefits, right? And all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
It feels
I
like
think I
every
think
4 generations you have to like look at what that generation did and bring it back. Because
yeah,
I
not
come
only
from that era too, and a lot of those games are kind of forgotten now, and they were really good.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so someone's got to rediscover them,
mm-hmm.
like, and so that like I was just going to say that, like, right now in 2025, like
Mm-hmm.
like there is opportunity for smaller teams to really be successful, and I think we're going to see a lot of smaller teams kind of get stood up
Mm-hmm.
in place of the larger 300 person IP studios. Those things will exist still, of course, but I think it's going to be the era of AA studios that start to really put out some amazing content. So
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty exciting, man. There's a lot to look forward
Yeah.
to in the coming years for it, and I think I just the market's there's so many games out there already. The market's crazy
Yeah.
saturated right now, but
Yeah.
it's still a booming industry and it's still going to make tons of money. And as long as that's the case, you know, there's plenty of room to continue to create
Mm-hmm.
things. So
So, let's just say, as a final thought, um, what do you got to say for yourself? Do you
oh
think
man, how do
the
I explain
game
myself?
industry has been a good choice for you, or just a final thought of?
Yeah, so I guess to like for me, just to kind of explain a lot, is that
Yeah.
if I'm not creating something, I'm kind of going insane.
Mm.
And maybe that has to do with the fact that I've been in the industry for 14 years now. I've been in for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm kind of a workaholic, so I tend to just always want to be working on a project. But but I love it. I love it. Yeah. So I'm really happy about
Mm-hmm.
my path, and kind of I've been very fortunate to be lucky enough to be considered for roles, and I got to go work on IPs that I love and adore. Like I aside from Halo, I got to go work on Shadow of War, which was, it's in the Tolkien universe. I love Tolkien's work and all of that. So I've been very, fortunate and thankful to work on some pretty amazing teams, and I've met so many people that have impacted my life in very positive ways. So I'm very very happy and thankful for that experience over the last decade, and yeah, I hope that I can keep this going. Like I of
Mm-hmm.
course just want to keep working on stuff, but I think I'm always just gonna have that itch, man. That always to have that itch to create things. And if I was to retire tomorrow, if I worked on a game or released a game idea and I was able to retire or something like that, I would probably go back and do painting, traditional painting,
Yeah.
and do sculpting or something like that. Like that's always been my idea of
Mm-hmm.
like retirement. It's just hanging out and sculpting all day. But no, man, it's been a good career, and like I'm looking forward to many more years of creating some
Awesome.
fun, awesome content. So
All
yeah,
right, man.
thankful.
Thank you very much for joining us. And that's a wrap for this episode of Final. Huge thanks to Greg Cox for joining me. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with a friend. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep creating, keep learning, and remember, nothing is ever really final. Not even the Final podcast.